So getting into volume 2 of the Eminence in the Shadow, I again will be covering spoiler content because the anime is not up to date as of currently, but I really have been loving the pacing for the anime and how detailed it's been going into the light novels. And as a reminder, I won't be covering everything under this volume because there's always so much to cover in every volume, so I will be making separate videos discussing other topic points as episodes come out, as I decide to do different topics on major key components. Because one of the things that I do love about light novel series like this is that certain events happen and then there's more to it in the next volume or the next volume, and so you kind of piece them all together and then you can kind of evaluate the entire journey rather than just a fragment of the journey. But it is also fun to look at certain parts of a journey and then the whole journey. But one of the downsides to that is those that have read further ahead generally have a tendency to jump into the comment section and go, well, actually, and it's like, okay, I get it, you've read ahead, let us enjoy the journey. I mean, that happens with every light novel series. So for me, what really stood out in this volume was the tournament, or the Bushin Festival. That was like a major key component that really stood out to me, though there are other little things that also go on, just particularly Beta. Beta is just really funny. She kind of reminds me a little bit of Albedo from Overlord, just kind of some of the ways that she thinks and talks and looks up to Sid / Shadow. I do find that kind of really funny. And also you find out a lot more about the cult of Diablos, and there possibly been hints of certain individuals having tie-ins, and there's a lot of corruption, and just the 12 members, the knights of the round, and how there's these tablets and they can only make a certain amount, and it's kind of clear that the same amount is to the round or the table, and there's so many little strings that are kind of tying one thing to the next to the next to the next, and I'm really interested to see how far that goes. And this is what I mean about what I said in one of my previous videos about Eminence in the Shadow has this really silly sort of top layer to the story where you've got Sid / Shadow doing his outlandish behavior and how he's just so over the top and outlandish, and the light novel series or manga or anime, whatever you want to refer to, is very self-aware of that. But under that layer is this really quite interesting story, and I personally just really like the name, the Cult of Diablos, because it reminds me a little bit of the actual Diablo franchise, Diablo 1, 2, 3, and 4, when that does come out hopefully next year. It just kind of, it's a nice little fun little trivial thing that I personally really enjoy, when there's like little names that may not be there deliberately to tie into what I think of, but it just is nice to have that, because you're like, oh, I was a big Diablo fan, and it's the Cult of Diablos, and it's kind of tied to that. I just personally really like it, and that's what I genuinely enjoy about series like this. But that being said, I really do love the interactions between the girls that are close to Sid, and how some of them use their slime outfits to kind of beef up their aesthetic pleasing assets. And there's this constant like tug of war to gain Sid's attention, and when he does give attention to them or notes on their appearances or their hair or something like that, they suddenly have these gushy moments. But that being said, you can clearly tell Sid's not doing it because he's trying to chase any of the girls. He's just kind of like, one, being courteous, but he also kind of like rewards them as like, what's the right thing to say in this kind of moments. And then they kind of take it as like, oh my god, he's noticing me, I'm finally making one step closer to be his main girl kind of thing. I just think that's really funny. It reminds me of other particular light novels, and that's the thing. It has fun poking holes at a lot of the power fantasies, isekais out there that have these tropes out there, and it's very self-aware of it. It makes fun of it. Which, that also being said, I've seen a lot of people get really angry at these kind of tropes where the series tries to do that, and it tries to be self-aware and make fun of it, and then people get offended by it and like, oh, it's so tropey. But it's like, you do know it's self-aware of itself, right? It's making fun of it, and then they get even more offended. So I think it's just funny, that kind of stuff happening. But with everything going on, especially with Beta taking a lot of that stuff that she's learnt from Sid, and then writing books, chocolates, all of these kind of little things that she's able to take from Sid's knowledge of his past life, especially the music. That was a big one for this particular volume was the music at the end where he was playing on the piano. And it's just funny because, again, it follows back into this kind of mindset that he has, that he learns these things to add to this aesthetic of him being this cult leader kind of thing. I just really found it kind of funny. It's like, oh yeah, I learned piano just for that moment, just for these kind of things. And it's just, it really adds to the kind of silliness and the fun of it. And he does actually kind of execute on that. He uses that moment, and it really adds to this moment where Rose is going through this massive event in her life where she's kind of backed into a corner. She doesn't know what she can do. She's been inspired by Sid and Shadow kind of separately, and she's determined to try and fight back against the cult of Diablos, and they've got their grasp on her father and brainwashed him, and so she ends up killing him, making a run for it, and then she ends up getting recruited to join the Shadow Garden. Though, of course, she hasn't worked out completely that Sid is Shadow and Shadow is Sid, but I feel like she's kind of getting the hints there pretty closely. And it also gives a bit of a backstory as well about Shadow or Sid, where she meets Shadow when she was kidnapped by bandits, and then he comes along, saves, and just says, oh yeah, just keep it a secret, you know, I'm just a bandit killer kind of thing. And so there's a little bit of backstory there, which I thought was kind of fun to see some of that backstory for Rose, because Rose really stood out in this volume to me. Like, she was the main center stage. Like, the chemistry between them was what I really enjoyed. And there are other little things, but for me, that's what stood out, especially the whole Bunshun Festival, if I pronounce it right, and how Sid goes there as the name Mundane. I love the name Mundane. I had to write it down to remember it, because it's a stupid name, but I get why he ran with the name Mundane. Like, it's yeah. I kind of thought it was funny that no one in the actual, like, in this, like, I would say, like, in the story kind of worked it out. Like, so some random person be like, hey, that's a kind of a weird name. Doesn't that kind of sound like the Mundane as, like, you know, mundane, normal, weak person? And then him running around completely dominating the actual tournament with his super speed and kind of playing with the minds of his opponents. And then from that, I kind of thought to myself, when I was reading through the tournament, I was like, you know what would be funny is if, like, near the end he actually shows himself as Shadow and ends up kind of doing some big sort of theatrical thing and then ends up sort of going off. I thought that would be a good way to end it, and lo and behold, that's pretty much how it played out. So I kind of predicted it, but predicting it doesn't spoil the fun of it. It's just kind of like, I guessed it, but seeing how it actually played out exactly to the minor detail was really, really quite fun. And then seeing, of course, Rose end up joining up in her sort of letting go of all of her past, especially with the fact that she did kill her father and she was meant to end up marrying some really creepy guy that she had some colorful names for, and that individual is working with the cult of Diablos. And the level of corruption and all the kind of crazy stuff going on there, there's so much to dissect in there that I will have to do in a separate video, because there's little details, little hints of certain characters tied to little things. But even then, I don't really want to give my speculation, because I'm kind of like, I feel like I'm gonna be off. Even though I got one of the things right for this light novel, I feel like there's so many little things. So I'm looking forward to reading volume 3, 4, and with 5 coming out in Japan, seeing where some of that stuff goes, because it's clear as day that the cult of Diablos has their sort of tendrils very, very deep into some components, while the Shadow Garden also has a lot of power and influence, because in this volume they're buying up like massive amount of land, doing certain things. They've got their own objectives, and they've got the ability to create a lot of assets to do what they need to do. Like, they've got the power financially because of Sid passing his knowledge on to Beta of his past life. Things like, as I mentioned, chocolate, the stories, the music, or the songs that he used to play on the piano. So she's able to use that to build up all these assets, knowledge, wealth, connections, and all that into different cultures and groups, so that they can then further the ambitions and the desires of what the Shadow Garden sows desire. There's also some other stuff to do with Sid and going into this kind of realm. There's some stuff there that I will save for another video, because there's kind of an interesting thing about the possession component that I thought was interesting, and I kind of feel like I'll need to reread it and kind of really absorb what's going on there. But that all falls into the whole Cults of Diablo stuff. But for me, what I loved was the whole tournament stuff. That was just like the highlight for me, and I really loved how it turned out. And I look forward to the next volume, and especially seeing where Rose goes from there, because clearly she's now going to be working with the Shadow Garden, and there's going to be some assignments that she's going to be set up to help, of course, further their goals. And she is number 666 of the girls. So that's kind of funny, because now Sid actually has 666 girls recruited as part of his organization, and he's the only male. That is pretty crazy, if you ask me. So again, I'd love to know your thoughts in the comment section down below. What stands out to you in Volume 2? What did you enjoy the most out of Volume 2? And hopefully, maybe, I might talk about that in a future video. And of course, I am looking forward to getting into Volume 3 for the Eminence in the Shadows. So if you like this video, hit the like button, subscribe for more anime content, and I'll see you beautiful nerds in the next video.